Today, let's look at how to identify the last cell in a column or a row that contains value, and we'll also look at how to identify the first cell in a column or row with a value. If you'd like to follow along with this example, as always, click the link in the description to download a copy of the example file. When you open up that file, you'll see this. We have a couple of examples set up. First, we have this blue highlighted row where the first cell containing a value is in column Q, and it just contains the phrase first value. Then we have a bunch of random text, and our final cell in the row contains the term last value. And we have a similar example set up in column H, so we can try looking for values in a column and in a row. So the output of this tutorial will be this. We're going to return the last or first cell in a column or row in basically three different ways. One, we'll retrieve the column or row number. For example, we'll find that the last cell in column H is in the 36th row. Then we'll look at how to return the actual value that's stored in that cell. In this case, it's either first value or last value. And finally, if you ever need to, we'll look at how to return the cell address. So we can see, for example, that the last cell in this column is located in cell H36. So let's go through how to put these formulas together. Now we're going to have to work with some array math here, and I'll explain what that means in a second. But that means it's going to be slightly easier to do in the latest version of Excel, Excel 365. But with a couple of small tweaks, we can also make it work in previous versions of Excel. So just follow along, and then I'll tell you the one small tweak you can make if you're on a previous version of Excel. So go ahead and type equals, open parentheses, then pick column H, and then type in the symbol for not equal to. That symbol is this left arrow, right arrow, and you can find those two keys between your M key and your question mark key, and then put in double quotes and close parentheses. Now, when you are working with a range of cells like this, in this case, the entirety of column H, and you apply some sort of math to it, like we're doing here, that is array math. Because a range of cells, or really anything that contains more than one value, is essentially an array as opposed to a single value or a single cell. When you apply some kind of mathematical operation, in this case, checking whether or not something is equal to a blank, or specifically, we're checking if something is not equal to a blank, when you take that sort of mathematical operation and apply it to an array, essentially, what Excel does is apply that mathematical operation to every value in that array. So in this case, we're telling Excel, go through every cell in column H and check if it's not equal to a blank. Then it's going to return either a true or a false, which Excel treats as a 1 or a 0, 1 for true, 0 for false. Meaning the result of this operation here is you will get a bunch of zeros and ones. It'll be a bunch of zeros for blanks and ones for values. So if you wanted to picture it visually, it would look like this. You have zeros wherever you have a blank, and then ones wherever you have a value. So having a bunch of zeros and ones is not really what we're looking for. So how do we make that something useful? We're going to take the result of this operation here, all the zeros and ones, and multiply it by something that'll make it useful. So put in the multiplication symbol, the asterisk, and then type in row, R-O-W, open parentheses, and then again column H, and then close parentheses. The row function is something that simply takes a cell reference and tells you what row it's located in. So if you were to type equals row and then put cell B6 in parentheses, the result of that formula would be 6. Now here, we haven't put in a cell reference. We've put in an entire column. So once again, we're doing some array math. By putting this entire column into the row function, I have essentially created an array that lists out the row number for every cell in column H. But then I'm multiplying that by a bunch of ones and zeros. Wherever you take a row number and multiply it by a zero, your result is going to be a 0. Anywhere that you multiply the row number by a 1, the result is going to be the row number. So by taking this first array and multiplying it by this row number array, we basically end up with a bunch of zeros wherever we have blank cells, and row numbers wherever we have cells that contain a value. So again, if you'd like to see this visually, here's that first array we created where we checked if each cell in column H is not blank. So the resulting array is basically a bunch of zeros and then ones where you have cell values. Then we took the row function to create an array that contains all the row numbers in column H. Then we multiplied the two arrays to get this result right here. Zeros corresponding with blanks in column H, and then row numbers corresponding with values in column H. And by looking at this, we can see the result we want to retrieve is 36. We want to find the last cell containing a value in column H is located in row 36. Another way to phrase that is we have this new array here with a bunch of zeros and row numbers, and we want to find the largest number contained within this array. Well, thankfully, there's a function for that in Excel called max. The max function takes any set of values and finds the maximum or largest value in that data set. So in this case, let's wrap this entire function in a max function. So I'm going to click right here between the equal sign and my first open parentheses and type in max. Then open parentheses, and then on the other side of this row function, I will put close parentheses. Enter. And you can see we get the value we're looking for, 36. Now, if you are using Excel 365, you're done, the formula works, and that's great. If you're in a previous version of Excel, it won't do this sort of array math on its own. You need to use an array function. That's the special sort of formulas you might have worked with in the past, where instead of pressing enter, you press Control-Shift-Enter, but we can actually do it in an even simpler way. There is a function in Excel that'll allow you to do certain array calculations without having to do a special array formula or anything like that. And it's the SUMPRODUCT function. So what you're going to do is wrap this entire formula in a SUMPRODUCT function. So I'm going to click between the equal sign and the max formula and type SUMPRODUCT. Then I'm going to open parentheses, and on the other side of my formula, I'm going to put another close parentheses. Then click enter. I won't go into a lot of detail into why the SUMPRODUCT formula works here. We could do a whole separate video on that. I'll just say that the SUMPRODUCT function is one that allows you to complete certain mathematical operations involving arrays. Now, if we want to find what value is actually located in the 36th row, you can use an index function. And if you need a reminder on what the index function does or how it works, I'd recommend you check out my video on the index match function, and I'll put a link to that. You can click on the card in the upper right corner. Here, to keep it simple, under value, type in equals index, then select column H, that's the array where we're looking for a value, comma, which value are we looking for? We're looking for the 36th value. So I'll select cell D5, then close parentheses and hit enter. You can see it correctly tells us that the final value in column H contains the phrase last value. Now, what if we wanted to get the address of that cell? This can be done very simply with the cell function. So type in equals cell. And what the cell function does is it returns the requested attribute of a cell. So for example, it can tell you the color of a cell if it's highlighted. It can tell you the width of a cell. In this case, we want to know the address of a cell. So you can put the word address in quotes, or if this helpful little menu pops up, you can click on address, and that'll do it for you, the word address in quotes, and then comma, and then we just need to tell it which cell we're interested in. And here we can again use the index function. So I'm going to type in the exact same function we just typed a second ago, index. We're looking at column H for our array, and then which cell or value do we want? We want the 36th cell. Then close parentheses for the index function and close parentheses for the cell function, and then press enter. And there you go, we get cell H36. And now to replicate this for a row, we don't really need to do anything differently. The only change will be that instead of column H, we'll be selecting row 11. So I'm not going to go through every step of that again. All I'm going to do is copy the formulas we just built. I'll copy them and paste them just below in row 6. And then I'll go back through and modify the formulas as needed. So in our first formula, where we retrieve the column or row number, I'm going to replace our reference to column H with a reference to row 11. So all I did there is I went into the formula, I deleted our first instance of H colon H, and then clicked on row 11. And then I'll repeat that over here where we have column H in our row function. Now we're also going to need to change our row function because everything in this row here is located in row 11. We're no longer interested in row numbers. Now what we're trying to find is a column number. We want to know which column contains the last value. So rather than the row function, let's delete that and use the column function, which does basically the same thing as the row function. You give it a cell reference and it tells you which column it's located in. And you can see we correctly find that the last cell containing a value is contained in column CL, which is the 90th column. For the other two formulas, we'll just make similar quick tweaks. So replace H colon H with row 11, and then the same thing for the address function. And we're done. That's how you find the last cell in a row or column, returning the row or column number, the value located in that cell, and the cell address. Now, let's look at how to find the first value in a row or column. At first glance, you might be tempted to take this max function and say, oh, easy, let me just replace that with a min function. That's not going to work because remember, the array we created by multiplying these two functions contains a bunch of zeros. So if you run a min function, in this example, we would want to find the value 21. But if you're looking for the minimum value, you're going to find 0, because 0, of course, will be lower than any of these row values. Instead, we'll use the match function. Again, if you need a reminder on what that does, click the card in the upper right corner to see my video on the index match function. But briefly, the match function essentially looks for a value within an array or range of cells and tells you which row or column contains that value. If the same value is repeated multiple times, for example, if I'm looking for the value 1 and there are a bunch of 1s in the row or column, the match function will give me the row or column that contains the first instance of the value 1. That can be tweaked in the function, so it's not always the case, but the way we're using it today, we're going to make sure that's how the match function works. Before we type out the formula, let's go back to our visual example and figure out what kind of a formula we need. So I just mentioned that the match function can search for a value, and if a column or a row contains many instances of that value, it will simply tell you where the first value is located. Well, that works perfectly for this array right here, where we have a bunch of zeros for blanks and a bunch of ones for values. That means if we use the match function to search for the value 1, it will tell us where the first one is located, and that's exactly what we want. Now, one thing we'll need to remember is the result of our array function, h is not equal to blank, I originally said gives you a bunch of trues and falses. And then I mentioned that Excel treats true and false like a 1 or a 0. One nuance to that is Excel will only treat true and false like a 1 or 0 when you try to involve the true or false in some sort of mathematical operation. So in our example, we multiplied row numbers by the trues and falses. So by applying any kind of a math, true, true, and false, Excel says, well, I can't multiply something by true or false, so instead I'll use 1 or 0. That slight nuance means that when we're using our match function, we won't be searching for the number 1, but we'll be searching for true. So without further ado, let's go ahead and type our match function. Equals match. What are we looking for? We're looking for true, so type true. And where are we looking for it? We're looking for it in our array that contains false wherever there's a blank, and true wherever we have a value. Remember, how did we create that array? Column H is not equal to a blank. Then comma, and we're looking for an exact match. So put in a 0, and then close parentheses. And we find that the first value is located in row 21. Now, again, if you are using Excel 365, you're good to go. If you're in a previous version of Excel, simply wrap this function in a SUMPRODUCT formula, just like we did up above. So that means take this entire match function and put it inside SUMPRODUCT. So SUMPRODUCT, open parentheses before the match, and then close parentheses after the match. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy our value and address formulas from above and paste them right next to the formula we just wrote out, and they should work just fine. And just like we did in the last cell example, we just found the first cell in a column. Now we want to find the first cell in a row. So just go ahead and copy the formula we just typed out, paste it in the cell below, in cell D9, and just replace our reference to column H with a reference to row 11. And you'll see, again, we correctly find that the first cell containing a value is in column Q, which, if you need a reminder, is the 17th letter in the alphabet. And then just to finish out our example, I'll copy down our value and address formulas and then just make the necessary tweaks. So instead of column H, we're looking for row 11, and the same change in our address function. And there you go. You've now found the last or first cell in a column or row, looking at the row or column number, the value, and the cell address. If you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the comments and I'll make sure to address it. And if there are any other topics you'd like to see me cover on Excel or financial modeling, let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to talk about it on this channel. And if you found this video helpful, please go ahead and hit the like button, click the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified the next time we release another video. Thanks for watching.